Sanji chudan tsuji chunam la chanchu pardo dane chamsu kage jinsu jibe sunam jindro la benjir sanji basho Sanji chudan tsuji chunam la chanchu pardo dane chamsu dagi Jinso jibe sunam chi rola penchir sanje droba sho sanje chudan soje chonam la chanju pardo dane jamsu chi dagi jinso jibe sunam chi rola penchir sanje droba sho Chumden de jambe yang lai chang tsai lo e kange lo dren dim nye dren dra nye dra nam da rab sar ve chi nye ten gun chi chen si chi ni che to kara le bam tse kanda si be tsun ra ma ri mun tu ma dung ra chi sir ve ro so kyun la pu chi tar se yen la chu chu yang den song Zhu dar che zhu nyu mo nie long le che jia zhu zhu zi jian ma ri mun si dong er nyu gu qi nie jun zi ra zhe nam. Du ne ta jian sa ju tar zun yun den lu zo ger si du yu gu ju zha ju da ju ni jian da lu mun si ren jian bei yang lai du. Zidin chu ji chen ra wu sir chi da lu di mu men ba rab san. Ka dan din ju shung lu to ba ye lu zhu bo be nang wa tsar tu sor. La perfection.
Here we go again. Ineffable, inconceivable, inexpressible perfection of wisdom. Not produced and not ceased, space in essence, domain of individual reflexive awareness. Homage to the Mother of Victors from all the three times. The heart of the glorious perfection of wisdom. Thus have I heard. Once the Glorious One was residing at Vulture's Peak in Rajagriha, together with a great assembly of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Glorious One abided evenly in the samadhi of the aspects of phenomena called appearance of the profound. Also at that time, the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasaha, beholding the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, observed that even the five aggregates are empty of substance. Then, by the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva. How should a son of the lineage or a daughter of the lineage train who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom? Addressed in this way, the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, said this to the venerable son of Sharadvati. Shariputra, the son of the lineage or the daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom should observe in this way. They should view correctly that even the five aggregates are empty of substance. Matter is emptiness. Emptiness is matter. Emptiness is not other than matter. Matter is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, apperception, conditioning, and consciousness are empty. Thus, Shariputra, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, not produced, not ceased, stainless, not free of stain, undiminished, unfulfilled. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no matter, no feeling, no apperception, no conditioning, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no phenomenon, no eye constituent until no mental constituent, up to and including no mental consciousness constituent, no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance until no aging and death, up to and including no extinction of aging and death. There is no suffering, origin, cessation, or path, no wisdom, no attainment, no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because bodhisattvas have no attainment, they rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Their minds, having no obscuration, they have no fear, and passing entirely beyond falsity, they completely pass beyond sorrow. All the Buddhas who abide in the three times by relying, too, on the perfection of wisdom have fully awakened into the unsurpassable, true, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom is the mantra of great insight, the mantra of the unsurpassable, the mantra appearing with the peerless, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering. Because it does not deceive, it should be known to be true. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is stated, Theata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisoha. Shariputra, in that way, Bodhisattva Mahasattvas should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the glorious one arose from that samadhi and praised the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva. Well done, son of the lineage, it is like that. Son of the lineage, it is like that. Just as you have taught it, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced. Even the Tathagatas admire it. After the glorious one had thus spoken, the venerable son of Sharadvati, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokiteshvara, and all of those surrounding, and the entire world with its gods, humans, demigods, and Gandharvas in admiration praise the words of the glorious one. Theata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisoha. Welcome once again. Following this preliminary part, we'll continue into the subject that we began this morning. And this morning, I underlined the importance of arriving at a real confidence concerning causality. The point concerning causality that is important here what is important for us to see is the point connected with successive birth. Of course, when we sometimes talk about emptiness, as we have a tendency in the West we have a certain way of apprehending our life, which is closer to what we may call a physicalist vision or a nihilist vision. There's this danger that we might interpret the teaching on emptiness as an absolute negation of everything, an affirmation that there is absolutely nothing, and that we might throwing the baby out with the bathwater is the risk. It's possible that we might fall into the extreme of annihilationism in general. When we speak about the Buddha's path, we talk about the middle way in terms of the view. The teaching on emptiness avoids these two extremes, the extreme of annihilationism that we've just mentioned. In other words, this view in which we think that what we call mind is an epiphenomenon produced by physical matter, the body, and that when the body ceases, the functioning of the body stops, then this phenomenon disappears. In other words, mind, our perception, consciousness, emerges based on matter and goes out or is completely annihilated when the physical body ceases. This is a physicalist view. It's also a vision that rejects the idea of causality In other words, that during our life, during our lifetimes, regardless of how we have acted, whether in a positive way or negative way, whether we have cultivated or not, attachment, desire, mental afflictions, whether or not we have done this has no consequence because our acts are annihilated at the moment of death and there is absolutely nothing after we are annihilated. And this, regardless or not, regardless of our practice, regardless of whether or not we have wisdom. It's very important to understand that this is not what was taught in Buddhism. This is never affirmed. This was not affirmed in any of the Buddhist teachings, nor any of his disciples, in none of the sutras or treatises. No masters have this view, which is commonly accepted to being an extreme view, an annihilationist view. There is a view that is said to be seen as superior to this, but which is also mistaken, the eternalist view. And this is a view that affirms that there is a substance, an I, that survives death and that will be reborn. That there is something that produced this reality, either an outer power, a divine power, a divinity such as God, or either a sentient being or a power that created, produced the world, ourselves. There's a great variety of theories that affirm the existence of self, the substantial existence of the world and of people, of individuals, and all of these views are said to be eternalist views. In general, in Buddhism, this view, compared with the previous annihilationist view, is considered more favorable because if we have an eternalist view, this will lead us to weigh our actions, to be attentive to our actions, to consider that our actions have consequences on us in the future because we're not reduced to our bodies, because there is something that survives the body. This view can bring us to adopt an ethical conduct, and in this sense, it is considered more positive or more favorable than the other view, the annihilationist view, that rejects absolutely everything and especially rejects the necessity of adopting ethical discipline because whatever I do, whether it's good or bad, it has no consequence whatsoever because I will become nothing. This is what we call in common day modern language YOLO. You only live once. I guess that's more of an Anglo-Saxon culture. There's no equivalent in French. Anyway. It's important to be careful about this. Why? The first reason for committing to a Buddhist path, a Buddhist practice in pursuing wisdom comes from a concern for avoiding further suffering for us in our lives in the future, and especially to completely liberate ourselves from this mechanism of suffering, discomfort, dissatisfaction. Although Buddhism does reject the idea of a substantial I or self, nevertheless, the mental aspects have a continuity. Our actions have consequences, they have a becoming, and they will manifest for us as experiences in our future. If in our future perception there are pleasant feelings or unpleasant feelings, what predominates depends on our actions. What is connected with mental afflictions always have painful consequences. The reason is not it's not like a Buddhist law or a statement, it's like this, believe it. This is the functioning of cause and effect. Effects correspond in nature to their causes. They are similar to them. What characterizes mental afflictions is that when these afflictions are manifest, then we experience suffering, dissatisfaction. It's very obvious, very clear with an affliction like hatred. When hatred is manifest, there's an enormous amount of psychological pain. We undertake violence, we put ourselves in danger. The consequences of hatred are always harmful. The state of hatred itself is something harmful, painful. It is agitation. It's characterized by mental agitation. And the actions that follow, the physical and verbal actions, express this agitation and this violence. And immediately put us in danger and condition our perception. The point that's necessary to see here concerning causality is that our way of apprehending and reacting to circumstances determines the way that we perceive reality later on. How things appear to us later, as well as, for example, someone who ceaselessly cultivates this violent, malevolent attitude will have a tendency to have enemies and to see enemies and to see insults and to see danger everywhere. That's their way of interacting. It corresponds. We see how our thought, our volition, our afflictions determine our perception, our experience, and our future, what we become. Our afflictions are by nature agitated. It might seem to us that desire is not as harmful as the expression of hatred. However, desire is also characterized by dissatisfaction, discomfort. Generally, with desire, what happens is that we're so focused on the pleasure that we desire that we don't see the aspect of of discomfort that accompanies this desire. In fact, when we feel desire, what is there is also something lacking, a kind of dissatisfaction. That's the discomfort that comes with desire. But we're so focused on the object that we desire, we don't see the dissatisfaction that we create with this expectation. In this way, all afflictions are dissatisfaction and suffering by nature. And therefore, actions are based on them are similar, and the results, the consequences of them will be similar. For example, all of us, all sentient beings, when we engage in whatever activity it may be, generally, we aim for improving our situation. We want something better, more pleasant. Nobody acts to make things worse, so that they suffer more. Some people do extreme things. They may kill themselves, commit suicide. But it's because they find their pain too difficult, and they think that in death they'll find relief. But it's never to suffer more. Everyone wants more well-being. We all look for this. But because we don't understand causality, in the name of well-being, we cultivate the causes for dissatisfaction and suffering. This comes from our lack of understanding, our lack of knowledge concerning our actions and our becoming, and lack of knowledge of causality. If we cultivate desire, hatred, jealousy, all of the forms of afflictions, the moment when these afflictions are present, we experience discomfort, and the actions that we undertake or dissatisfaction, then the actions that we produce will create greater dissatisfaction. In a certain way, we take refuge in these afflictions. We look to these afflictions as something that will save us. We look at desire as a motor to help us find happiness, hatred as a way of destroying the difficulties around us. But in fact, we only aggravate the situation. We only further perpetuate the suffering and this confusion in which we often are. Concerning our daily actions, the afflictions are not things that only appear sporadically or once a while ago. They constantly manifest concerning every perception, every feeling, and there's always attachment, rejection, fear, hope, attraction, aversion. All of these things are constantly present, and the afflictions are also constantly present. And adjacent to all of this, or underlying all of this, is ignorance, self-grasping. As we saw this morning, what we call I is simply a concept. It doesn't have a substantial, efficient correspondence. There's not something that is singular, one, that is permanent. we will not find such a reality. This confusion, this notion of I, creates this will of wanting something for ourselves. That's the basis of desire. If there's not an I, then there's no desire. So that's a sort of summary of certain points. So now we've briefly covered suffering, the origin of suffering, as being above all the afflictions, and underlying the afflictions, ignorance. We didn't develop this point of ignorance very much, but we'll come back to it later. Then there is cessation of suffering, and lastly, the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. The path, of course, we can sum it up in what we call the 3 fields of training: ethical discipline, Shila, Samadhi, Prajna. Ethics, meditation or meditative stability, and wisdom. There are many points, but the point that I'd like to emphasize this point concerning the continuity, if I may. When causes and conditions are brought together, or when they are present for confusion, then it is present. Distraction, confusion. So long as the causes are present, then this suffering or dissatisfaction continues. The end of this suffering does not appear on its own. This is illustrated in the Bhavana Chakra, the wheel of becoming. In front of temples, there's often a description of samsara. I don't know if you've seen this before, perhaps. You can see the personification of impermanence, which is a monster that is holding a disc that is a mirror. And in this mirror, there is the reflection of samsara, different life forms, destinations in samsara. In the center, there are 3 animals that are each biting the other's tail and that are going in a circle. They symbolize the 3 poisons: ignorance, desire, and aversion. They are symbolized or represented. Ignorance is represented by a pig, desire by a rooster, and hatred by a serpent. They are each biting the other's tail. Ignorance symbolizes our confusion, and especially our mental confusion that is the basis, the root of this experience of samsara. That's the first circle. And then generally there's a second part, smaller part, that's divided in 2. There is a rising path and a descending path. And we can see beings that are very slowly, unpleasantly going up, and they seem to easily fall down. This shows how pleasant conditions in samsara are very difficult to attain, but unpleasant conditions arrive very, very easily. In some of the very old drawings, we can see beings that seem to be crossing barrels. And you can see half of a body that's a human body and half of a body that's an animal body. And this shows us that there's no situation or condition in samsara, human, animal, that is stable. As a human, we can be reborn as an animal. As an animal, we could be reborn as a human. We can go through or to any destiny according to our disposition and conditioned by our actions. And this is so long as our confusion, distraction is present, this is what is produced. We see this, that's what's depicted in the Buddhist teaching. This is true for all of the teachings, Mahayana Theravada. They all affirm this. No Buddhist teaching rejects the notion of causality and the possibility of taking birth in all of these various destinies. And so this also connects with our motivation, the reason why we practice. If there are not these future rebirths, then why practice the Dharma? There's no reason. We practice the Dharma to escape from the cycle of successive rebirth. So the first point is to acquire a certain confidence concerning the understanding, to correctly understand causality and have confidence concerning the functioning of causality as it is presented in Buddhism. In other words, so long as ignorance and our afflictions are present, the experience of suffering will be present and continue. We can refer to this image, this illustration. There's another segment of the Bhavana Chakra that's divided kind of like a cake, sometimes into 5 parts, sometimes into 6 parts. There's a part at the very top of the wheel or the mirror. Sometimes it's explained as a wheel. It's a mirror. It's a circular mirror. The part on top is dedicated to the most pleasant conditions, the happiest conditions that we call the divine conditions. The lower part, the next part, are semi-divine conditions, and then according to certain illustrations, then there's human condition and animal condition, and then in the lower part, the condition of the pritas, which is often translated as hungry ghost, is a common term. Starving spirits, another term. And then lower down, there are the Avicii, infernal destinies. Not all of these destinies are necessarily perceptible for us. For example, we don't see pretas, we don't run into them in the street in France or elsewhere. We also don't run into the Avicii. We don't perceive them. The reason why we don't perceive them is because they're so different. They're so different than we are. Their conditions are so different that even if they were present, we couldn't see them. Whereas the animal condition, various animal conditions, are perceptible to us. There are these There's a question in the room, but they're not using a microphone and I can't hear what they're saying.
Je vais pas le micro, c'est pas la peine, ça va éviter la diffusion de.
Oui, il n'y a pas de problème. Je vais voir ce qu'il dit.
Si tu vois que c'est.
Je vais voir ce qu'il dit et on verra. We'll see what we can. We'll see what we can get from the answer. Concerning your question, and perhaps to clarify a bit the point that I brought up, these places are not geographically situated destinations. Sometimes we can find notions such as subterranean beings, celestial beings, terrestrial beings, aquatic beings. There are these kinds of distinctions. Another interruption from the room. Not sure how relevant it is, but in any case, we'll see what Rinpoche says. Okay. It sounds as though it's more of a personal reckoning than a direct question. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. The person's still talking. So we were talking about the Bhavana Chakra, 5 or 6 destinies, depending on the descriptions. And the possibility of them is not so much because they exist as a geographically situable, findable location, but we can see the possibility in terms of the afflictions. If hatred predominates our perceptions, then the destiny is an infernal one. If there is a possibility, it's not because these destinies exist somewhere, but because we can see hatred, and we can see that when hatred predominates, it determines our perception, and the world that we perceive is tainted by or produced through hatred. And then the experience of hell, for example, the predominant affliction for humans is desire, pride in the divine realms, stupidity for animals, greed or avarice for the world of the pretas. The preta existence is an existence in which there's constantly a feeling of lacking, everything is going badly. There are people like that, very rich, who have many belongings. and which nevertheless have a feeling of lack, of incompleteness, something that we see this in the descriptions of the world of the Pretas. We can consider how the world appears to us. How do we experience our life? How does it manifest? That this depends on our mind fundamentally and the actions of our mind. That was the point that I wanted to emphasize for you, underline. So that was concerning the first cycle of teachings. Associated with this, also the importance of causality and developing confidence in causality. Then there's the second cycle of teachings, which is more directly connected with our text. This is the cycle of teachings of the absence of characteristics. This absence of characteristics means that we do not find any substantial reality, any being in and of itself. This cycle of the teaching, the place, the location for the first one was Sarnath. This one occurred at Vulture Peak in Rajgir. There's a fairly vast literature on the perfection of wisdom. There are several texts of various sizes, lengths. The shortest version, one of the shortest, is the Heart Sutra. The reason why it is called Heart is because we could also translate this by essential. What is the shortest expression, the most condensed or concise expression, similar to the heart, which is the essential organ of the heart, without which we cannot live. In this sense, all of the points that are laid out and developed in great detail are evoked very briefly in this Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom. And it is in this sense that the sutra is essential or heart. This sutra is a part of what we call the 5 Royal Sutras, which make up the daily texts recited by the Buddhist kings of Tibet when Buddhism was introduced to Tibet. There was the Prajnaparamita Trindaya Sutra, which is considered to be the Sutra of the View. It is a condensed summary of the second cycle of teachings, the Sutra of the Prajnaparamita, the Sutra of Wisdom. Then there's the Asajana Sutra, which is considered to be an abridged version of the Sutra of Parinirvana. There is the Vajradharani, associated with the Ratnakuta Sutra, which is a practice text of purification. The previous one was the Sutra of the Practice of the Moment of Death. And the Vajravidarani is that of purification. Then there is the Vajraparicharudana Sutra, which is associated with the Avatamsaka. It's an excerpt from the Avatamsaka Sutra, which is concerning wishes, a certain number of bodhisattvas' wishes. Then there's another important text, Apatideshana Sutra, which is associated with the Lankavatara Sutra, which is considered to be the Sutra of the purification of laws. This is the practice of the 35 Buddhas. We also call it the Sutra of the Three Aggregates. These are 5 very important sutras that are practiced and recited daily. They were recited daily at the time of the Buddhist kings, but a certain number of these sutras are recited daily in monasteries, retreat centers, here at Dhagpo, I think. These are the shortest versions of vast teachings, and this is particularly the case for the Prajnaparamita, Trinlay Sutra, which is the object of our study here for the days to come. Now it would be interesting to look at the meaning of prajna. What time is it? 4 o'clock. I'm going to leave a little time for questions as we didn't have a lot of time this morning. And then we will look at the more precise meaning of prajna, wisdom. If you have questions, I'm listening. How do we take the I out of our approach? In fact, it's not really trying to take I out. It's not worth thinking I'm gonna no longer say I'm not gonna think I. In a way, that's not the goal. I think firstly, it's a question of attachment. The fact that we're only concerned with ourselves, we only think of ourselves. This comes from a particular attachment to this I, this notion of self, and this then translates into reinforcing afflictions, pride, wanting things for ourselves, hatred, aversion. All of this will be accentuated. So when we see that in terms of this I, there's no substantial entity, this attachment to the I will also lessen. And due to this, the for me, the desire for ourself, and the hatred, aversion, all of this will be able to appease it. The goal is to be able to surpass mental afflictions, not to say, starting from today, I'm not going to use the word I anymore. Conventionally, we can't not use this word. we can also understand that I is a conventional entity, that it's not a substantial entity in the ultimate sense of the term, but conventionally, I can designate this multitude of impermanent things as I. It's a name, but the question is, mentally, am I attached to it or not? Am I thinking I'm the most important? Will the desire and hatred grow based on this? If I see that, in fact, it's just an illusion, that this I has never existed, thank you. Is it possible to clarify concerning this morning? Consciousness, the continuum, is there a finality? What do we mean by this? To consciousness. You mean, does consciousness have a use, a purpose? Is it spread out over the continuum? What is the finality of consciousness? This concerns a convention of translation, of course. We often translate the Sanskrit term Vijnana, which is namshe in Tibetan, by the term consciousness. The term consciousness, depending on doctrine or philosophy, can have divergent meanings. So here I'll simply try to define this term based on the Buddhist teaching. In the case where consciousness is the translation of Vijnana, it concerns this particularly designates the aspect of duality in consciousness. In other words, today, in our impression, in our experience, even if we do not formulate concepts for a particular grasping, reality manifests in duality, in terms of duality. For us, there is a subject that knows and a phenomena that we perceive. In our experience, these manifest as two separate, distinct entities. And in terms of this duality, then we speak about consciousness. I think the etymology corresponds more or less. Consciousness, well, the French etymology is to know with. On a conceptual level, or even a non-conceptual level, there is this impression of separation between subject and object. But mind is not defined by consciousness. Mind is something, one definition given is salfin rigpa, clear and knowing. Salwa, there is this notion of clarity. There's an analogy with light. As light allows for the visible, because there is light, we can see. Because there is mind, we can know. It has this capacity, this particular characteristic of experiencing, of knowing. Also, you can see with the terms consciousness, mind, there's another subtlety, which is, this doesn't imply, for example, there's a moment of waking, moment of deep sleep, moment of dreaming. There are different experiences. In common language, we'll say, I was conscious during a waking moment, and during a moment of deep sleep, we'll say it's a state of unconsciousness. But the more subtle aspect of mind, the clear and knowing aspect of mind, continues. Just in the same way, in a moment of deep sleep, in a moment of dreaming, and in a moment of waking. Even if I don't have this notion of grasping something, there is this quality. But it's necessary not to see it as a substantial entity. It is a continuum, if you will, a continuum in the sense that we can say this present moment, its nature is that of passing. There's nothing substantial. There's nothing that remains unchanged, permanent. It changes. And when it changes, it is always followed by another moment. And then the following moment comes from the fact that the preceding moment disappeared. And the following moment has the necessary conditions to appear and to give rise to the following instant. In this way, we speak of a continuum. This continuum can make us think that there is some kind of indivisible moment. Of course, the past doesn't exist anymore, the future doesn't exist yet, but this present moment of experience, we might think that there is a kind of substantial moment, an indivisible, substantial moment. But this is not the case. If it were the case, it would be some kind of permanence. The present moment, there is not a substantial present moment that we can find that exists in and of itself. It's constant change, constantly changing. We can find nothing substantial on any level in terms of the subject, nor in terms of objects or phenomena that we perceive. Everything is impermanent, constantly changing. We can find nothing that abides and then due to itself, based on itself. In terms of our understanding and knowing, knowledge, there are different degrees. There's a degree of confusion, where we do not understand the reality of mind. We grasp a subject and an object, a duality. This level of confusion, we speak of consciousness. And then in terms of the absence of confusion, we speak of, for example, primordial consciousness, atemporal consciousness of mind that has this quality of luminosity, if I may, but that is in no way a substantial identity, a substantial entity that we can reify, but is a quality that we all have, and which is in reality free of duality. If we look, we won't find self nor other. Duality is a Adventist construction that expresses our confusion, our misunderstanding of reality. And it's our misunderstanding of the original reality of mind that leads to confusion in samsara and the perpetuation of suffering, discomfort, dissatisfaction. Your successive explanations are helping clarify bit by bit. I think I'm trying to understand the continuum in terms of death. In fact, there's no difference between the transmission of karma and all that we have on a dual level from one moment to another to the moment of death. Is that it? Yes, that's it. So what's transmitted from moment to moment, I think with the mode of functioning that I have, I'm looking for a support, but in fact, there's no support. There's no support, indeed. So can we compare this to the transmission of, oh, I missed what she said, some kind of energy that's transmitted. Was she talking about neurons? I'm sorry, I'm always looking for a material example. Rinpoche says, don't worry about examples. The important thing is to know that if we look well, if we look at this continuity, we'll never find a support. This comes from our preconception that there is something substantial. Ordinarily, we'll say that we have the impression that if I experience, it's because things exist. At our level, we perceive, and due to this, we deduce that what we perceive exists as we perceive it. Because we perceive something, then there is indeed someone who is perceiving it that is different than what is perceived. And then we deduce that there is a substantial individual that exists, that perceives, and that there is a substantial object that we perceive that exists. Because it's blue and I see it, it's because it's there and it's blue. We think that because we perceive, there is a support, there's something substantial, and that if there were no support, all of this would not occur. I see blue because there's blue. I see someone because there is indeed substantially someone. And I see because I am me who sees someone. So for us, what justifies experience is substantiality. But if we really look, something substantial would not actually produce an experience. That which is substantial, given that it's substantial, it can't change, it can't transform, whereas everything that is experience is connected with change. Experience is possible because things change, not because somewhere or other there is something substantial and unchanging. To continue with this subject a bit, when analyzing the present moment, we can see that it's insubstantial. When we talk about a continuum or causality even, Is this only functioning in relative reality? And so in ultimate reality, this doesn't function, it's not functioning? To talk about and see mind as a continuum, it's valid in relative reality, but not in ultimate reality? Yes. That's what's the question exactly? I wanted to be assured that thinking of mind as a continuum is valid for us with our dualistic vision in relative reality. But in fact, it's nothing to do with or nothing like ultimate reality. Well, when we say relative reality, conventional reality, and ultimate reality, this concerns two different modes of perception. On the one hand, the relative mode is dualistic, confused. It's the basis for our concepts. Of course, there are completely mistaken concepts. And then there are concepts that we could say are not mistaken, but insofar as its representation, it's still conventional because there is representation. And when we talk about ultimate knowledge, there is no representation, no description of this or that. For example, we're talking about a continuum, and continuum can help us to understand that there's not a substantial entity, so it's a more correct understanding, but it doesn't mean that there's a second ultimate reality. It's not another dimension. Ultimate reality is inseparable from reality. It's just a question. It's a question of representing reality through images or not. I can't hear the person asking the question. I was wondering if we manage to understand the insubstantial aspect of an entity, what happens to empathy and what does it mean for compassion? In fact, compassion, there are different levels of understanding or different forms of compassion. Often for us, we become aware of the extent of their suffering, particular suffering. But if the understanding of the insubstantiality, It's important not to reify insubstantiality either. When we talk about insubstantiality, we might reify it as though it's an entity. In fact, true compassion is understanding the confusion of beings and seeing how, based on their confusion, they are experiencing pain and suffering. And this understanding only comes if we ourselves understand this confusion. If we understand that beings grasp an I where there's not an I, grasp a reality where there isn't any substantial reality. This understanding, for us, allows us to truly have compassion for beings. In short, compassion that is based on the self towards an other is very limited compassion. Compassion that surpasses, that goes beyond attachment to I, and that surpasses or goes beyond all discrimination between self and other, is true, veritable compassion. And this true compassion comes from understanding the confusion of beings. The fairly vast and subtle subject. When we say, it's an important point that you bring up, because we might think, okay, well, insubstantiality, if we think of it in terms of there aren't other sentient beings, well then, of course, who do we have compassion for? But that's not it. There are other sentient beings, just as there's me who's having this experience, but not as a substantial entity. Emptiness is not the affirmation of nothingness, that there's nobody, that I don't exist and others don't exist and there isn't anything at all. That's an extreme, an understanding that falls into the extreme of annihilationism that I tried to warn you against in the beginning. The first thing that it's necessary for you to understand is causality, and to have confidence in the notion of causality. Just as I am here experiencing this situation, this experience will continue. This conditioned experience will continue if I don't understand the reality of my mind. And I will be subject to dissatisfaction again and again and again. Then we need to understand the mechanism of this dissatisfaction. This is why we need to understand causality. On this basis, then, is emptiness, the notion of emptiness, and the negation of causality? No, not at all. Emptiness is a synonym for dependent arising. Emptiness is the same thing as causality. When we speak of emptiness, we're not looking to have a concept or a representation of the world that doesn't exist, this doesn't exist, or it exists in a certain way. The goal is course, the goal is to eliminate our ignorance and all afflictions, to find the most subtle aspect of our mind that is naturally free of confusion and free of afflictions. And then there, if I may, this is where our liberty is. This is where we are free from all conceptions, all constructions, from all artifice. when we say emptiness, this is also a way of analyzing. We take the substance that we attribute to phenomena, and then we apply a critical analysis to see if our preconception, if our grasping has something that corresponds to it. And then we see that there is nothing that corresponds to this, then we can be free of or let go of this mistaken grasping. We'll talk about this again. We'll talk about wisdom more in detail. I think we can conclude here for today. Thank you for your attention.
Namdi tamchi ziba nye tone nye be rana pamchi ne chega na je balap truba sibe sole drowa sho changju semcho rimbo che ma che panam chi juru chi che ba nyamba me ba kone kondo pe war sho